Okay, good morning, guys. I'm going to get us started here in just a minute. Let's move us on over here so we can get started. I think that'll do it for us. I'm going to make sure that we're sharing my screen so you can see it. Okay, good. I think we're good to go. Okay. Well, good morning. My name is Teresa Doherty. I am the coordinator for Business and Information Technology programs here with Virginia Beach City Public Schools. And this is the essential training for the desktop publishing course. So this course was actually formerly known as Design Multimedia and Web Technologies, or DMWT. So if this is a course that you have taught in the past, nothing has really changed. We haven't shifted what the content of the course is. We've just made a shift in terms of the terminology that we use to refer to it. So it's really just kind of a course name change, and that was really to simplify and better streamline kind of the content of the course. It was creating some confusion as we begin to offer this at both the middle and high school levels. So we wanted to go ahead and make that change early. And so we're going ahead and referring to it as desktop publishing. So that's what you'll see from this point forward, that desktop publishing and DMWT are actually the same course. So welcome. This is a semester course, and it's going to cover predominantly different aspects of design software. So most of the time, if you're teaching this at the high school level or at a high school site, you're going to be using the Microsoft Office suite. However, because this is a course that is newly being offered at the middle school site, and that's not always something that's available, you do have some flexibility in there to use a Google program or another program. VDOE does not specify that we have to use Microsoft. It's something that we have readily available at some sites, but then, as I mentioned, at the middle school sites, that's not always necessarily something easy to find. The good news is you aren't going to have to worry about any kind of certifications or anything, so it's not going to have a huge bearing on that. It's more just kind of introducing that software to them. So anyway, it's a semester course, and in addition to looking at different types of software, it also introduces a little bit of basic programming, and I don't want that to scare you if this is something that's new that you're teaching for the first time this year. You're not going to have to go super deep into it. Really, you're talking about the design side of websites, and there's a single unit that's dedicated to that. So you're not talking about having 18 weeks of programming. You don't have to worry about being a computer science guru. This really is just kind of a light touch on something. So I think that it'll be kind of fun for you to learn, and definitely something that your kids will be interested in learning a little bit about. So it is a relatively fast-paced course. You have 18 weeks, and we've kind of broken it down into 4 different areas to make it a little bit easier. So you'll find that you're rapidly moving from one section to the next. So don't feel like you have to be a resident expert in each of those, because you're going to spend just a little bit of time in each of them. And I think it's just enough to kind of whet the appetite of someone who might be interested in moving forward with design software. So there are not any certifications that are in this course. Anytime we have a semester course, just so that you kind of have this information, especially for our new folks who maybe this is not something you've taught before, there are no official certifications that are tied to semester courses. So you may, if it's available to you, choose to make use of materials that we also use for those courses that offer certifications. And in particular, I'm thinking of our Imagine Academy or our Geometrics platform, which is kind of the practice platform for a lot of our certifications. And it's got some stuff in there. If it's available to you, that's great. If it's not, please don't feel as if you're missing out. There are a lot of different other options, and specifically, probably Google is going to be a really great one. And then there is the Office 365 version of some of these items that might be helpful. as well. But again, there's some flexibility that happens in there, and it's not required for this course because there are no certifications that actually come through this. In fact, if you have students who at the end of taking your desktop publishing course are interested in looking at a certification, they can, and I would recommend that they look at a computer information systems class. That's a year-long course that does have actually several certifications that are tied to it, and they have the option of moving on to a second year and completing the advanced computer information systems course, which also has additional advanced certifications that are tied to it. So if you're familiar with the MOS master concept, the Microsoft Office Suite master concept, it's kind of like that. Microsoft has made a shift away from the master, but they still have something similar to it where you are shown as being competent in the entire Microsoft Office suite. So that's something that if they're interested in doing or pursuing, excuse me, you can always offer that up to them as a future option to sign up for. So I know there are probably some questions about the Microsoft versions, especially because we are getting ready to roll into the 1920 school year and there have been some changes. So I wanted to make sure that I popped this in here just so that in case you were curious or concerned about anything, you had all of the information. So the school division in Virginia Beach has opted to move forward with Microsoft 365. So what you'll find on your personal computers, if you are at the middle school level teaching this for high school credit, your students who have their Chromebooks, they're also going to have the Microsoft 365 version. However, if you are in a computer lab designated for business and IT at the high school level, you're going to see the Microsoft 2016 version still. And that was a decision that I made specifically to ensure that we aren't moving forward without appropriate curriculum and support. And the 2019 and 365 items are still kind of being rolled out by Microsoft. So because we do have certification classes that are taught in those labs, the decision was made to remain with the 2016 version, at least for the 1920 school year. And then over next summer, before we move into the 2020-2021 school year, we also will shift to the Microsoft 365. So like I said, that's not going to have a whole lot of bearing on what you're doing in here because you're not worried about certifications, and that's really where that alignment is coming in. To be quite frank, there is not a huge difference between 2016 and the 2019/365 versions. There's some minor modifications, but by and large, if you are a Microsoft user, you're just not going to notice a whole lot of those changes, especially if you're not getting into some of the more in-depth options and tools that they have. So don't worry too terribly much about that. Just wanted to go ahead and at least give a nod to that so that you have that information, because I know a few of you are probably curious about that. So, by the way, what we're looking at right now is the landing page for the desktop publishing course inside Schoology. So Schoology is something that at this point we should all be using, should have some at least passing familiarity with. And I do try to make good use of this as a repository for you, as a place for you to connect with your peers who are teaching this across the division, and as a place for you to find resources that are going to be helpful, both for the course as well as your classroom. So this is the landing page. It will essentially remain the same here. I don't really put any other updates on here. This is mostly for folks who join me from semester to semester who are just looking for a brief overview of what this course is. Sometimes I'll have site administration who's interested in the course and needs to know a little bit more about it. This is a place for them to go. This is the access code right over here in green that you'll use to make sure that you have access to this, or if you have a peer at your school that will be teaching this, you just want to share this access code with them, that's more than fine. I do like to always put a little something down here in the information section, and this is pulled almost verbatim from our CTE Resource Center website, or the Versa website. And so this is kind of the state description of what this course is. So you'll see it talks a little bit about developing proficiency in websites and industry standard applications and so on. I just find that it's nice to have that. It's a blurb if you are creating your syllabus and you want to take that and plug that in there, or you're just looking for another way to rephrase what it is that this course is about, this is just a nice, handy little thing to have. So anyway, this is where you'll go for any of the information or the resources that we use for this class. And throughout the course of this training video, by the way, this is intended to take the place of the face-to-face essential trainings that are happening for new courses or updated courses. So this really is going to be a distilled down version of what you typically would have received had we been face-to-face. And the intent behind this is really to free up your time so that you can come back and look at this when it's something, when you have time to do it. You can go back and review or revisit certain portions if you have questions. And it'll be available to you indefinitely. So essentially, when this recording is finished, I'm going to drop it into a folder inside this course that says Essential Training, and you'll be able to go back to it anytime. It also helps those teachers who maybe you found out that this is on your schedule in August, but you're not teaching it until January. Even if I gave you an Essential Training in August, you're still talking about several months between the time that you get the information and the time that you need the information. So I just found that this is something that's probably going to be a little more useful for you. What you aren't receiving, because this is a distilled down version, are things like conversations with vendors that we might be using, or resident expert teachers that might have come in and shared a particular lesson or a unit, and just the general anecdotal sidebar conversations that come from being face-to-face. Having said that, my intent is to have this as kind of a front-loaded option for you, and the expectation, because it's an essential training, is that anyone who is teaching this course is going through an essential training, and you'll see an option for that in Frontline. But the intent is to also offer a face-to-face roundtable, and those of you who have been with the business, or at least the TCE family, for a while know that we used to have roundtables quite a bit, and it just gets to be a lot because oftentimes in our business and IT family, you're teaching multiple courses, and so having a roundtable for attending a roundtable for a specific course might have you out 4 or 5 times in a given month every month, and it just didn't seem to be a really great use of your time, especially off contract hours, and you guys are busy. So the intent would really be to offer something like this as a face-to-face roundtable option, and that'll kind of rotate around. It won't be every month. I'll probably have one at some point in the fall, probably October, get you guys through September and give you some time in the fall, and then do it again in the spring. Now, that doesn't preclude you from connecting with your colleagues who are teaching this at other places and getting together in addition to that, but at least this way you know that there's going to be something coming down the pike that's going to be a face-to-face opportunity for you. So, okay, enough of that. Let's take a look at the rest of this Schoology site. So the next thing that I wanted to show you is the discussion board. And I don't know how often other teachers or coordinators might make use of this, but the idea behind this collaboration and questions board is that it offers you an opportunity to do some of those collaboration things, or ask some of those questions, or provide, share an activity or a lesson that worked really well for this with other folks across the division outside of the confines of a face-to-face meeting. A lot of you are singletons, meaning you are the only person in your entire school who happens to be teaching this. So collaboration can be kind of tough. So even if you have other business teachers in your school, they may not necessarily be teaching this, or they may not have taught it for several years. So this is a way for you to connect with other folks who are teaching the same thing that you are. And while I do moderate this, I'm not always the one who's posting. I'm not always the one who's answering questions. A lot of times, because you are frontline, boots on the ground, you're able to answer a lot of those questions for one another. And it's something that, just like when you have students in your classroom and you know that there are other kids who have the same questions that the kid in the front does, but they're not willing to ask, the same kind of thing happens here too. Other folks may be wondering about the same thing that a person posed a question about. So having those answers up here, and I just kind of let the history sit so you can always scroll through and look for solved problems. It's just kind of a nice way for you guys to connect with each other and a place to collaborate that doesn't require you to drive across town. So that's really all that's going to be over here. Most of your time for this course is really going to be spent on the Resources tab. So inside the Resources tab, here's the folder I told you that where the recorded training will sit. So your central training will be in there. I'm not sure what format will ultimately land on. Right now, I keep them in an MP4 format as well as a YouTube link, and we'll just kind of see how that works, and that may change. So as you look at the essential training later on, you may be using one of those two formats, or you may have something new in there. The front matter is really not something you're going to spend a whole lot of time looking at. It's a multi-page document that kind of generally introduces the course. It provides a lot of technical information about how Virginia Beach supports learning, and it's not necessarily something that is intended for you as the educator, but it is something that is expected to be included in each of the courses. So just kind of know, you can check it out. There is good information in there. I just don't think out of all of the things that you'll use this for, that this is really going to be the place that you spend a lot of time on. So I'm going to come to resources last, because that, again, is going to be the part, even inside the resources tab, where you're going to spend most of your time. But I want to go over to the competency log real quick. So competency logs are items that are required to be kept for 5 years. So the VDOE requires us to keep those student competency logs for at least 5 years, and they can be done in several different ways. They can be kept electronically or by paper. I would say electronically is definitely the way to go. But what I like to do for this is keep it as a link rather than upload the options for a Word document or an Excel document or CSV in here, simply because this link takes you directly to Verso, or to our Resource Center, which has the most up-to-date student competency records and competencies that the state requires. And this is really important. I think sometimes folks forget, so it's really great for those of you who are new, and it's also a wonderful refresher for those who've been teaching for a while, that this is what should be driving your course. These are the competencies that the kids have to know when they leave your class. So it's really important that they know what they're doing, and it's really important that you're keeping track of that. So what I want to do real quick, I'm going to pop over to the Verso website just so you can kind of see where this leads. So if you clicked on this link, it's going to take you to the Resource Center, and specifically it's going to take you directly to the student competency records. So I'm going to click on that just so you can kind of see what the options are. So when it takes you, this is the page that it'll take you to, you have options to download different things. And most of the time, what you'll do is have the students download something like this for you, and then they'll fill it out, and you'll keep a track of that record for 5 years. And you'll just kind of collect it, and you can keep them all together in an Excel spreadsheet, or you can have them, like I said, download it and keep track individually and then submit it to you. But that's what you're looking for. Okay, while we're over here, the CTE Resource Center is, which stands for Career and Technical Education for those of you who are new. This is where we get all of our competencies. So when you think about the state learning standards that you have for any other course that we might offer, whether it's English or history or whatever, this is where we get ours. These are the competencies that are required by the state for students to have in order to be considered skilled in this area. And one of the first things that you'll notice about all of the courses in CTE is that the first 21 skills are all the same. They're workplace readiness skills. However, this changed this summer. So for years there have been 21 skills, and you'll notice now we go to 22. So as you're going into the material, that the units and things that we have set up and assessments that we have set up, you're still going to notice there are 21 in there. We are working steadily on that to get through the update. The 22 is a combination of things that have been deleted because they were older, they weren't necessary anymore, or they've been combined with something else, or they have just been needed to be added based on just kind of shifts in the workplace and industry. So now we have 22. They've all kind of changed just a little bit. So you'll notice that we'll be updating that in the coming months. But just know when you click on that student competency record link, that's why. It's because of stuff like this. This way, when you have the student competency records and you download them from the link, you know they're going to have 22 in there. The other thing while we're on here is the examining aspects of industry and addressing elements of student life. Those are also the same in every single CTE course. You're always going to see those, and they really have to do with the same kind of stuff that we talked about in some of our other courses. So the for example, addressing elements of student life has to do with professional development and professional associations. Just like we do as educators, we belong to our own associations. For the students, their student organization in business is FBLA, or Future Business Leaders of America. So this is just something that's incorporated into all of the business classes for exactly that reason. The other thing that's been added is the exploring work-based learning. So in addition to the 22 rather than 21 workplace readiness skills, they've now added this little component in here that includes 3 required work-based learning. And by the way, all of these things, because I know that this can seem kind of daunting when you're looking at an 18-week course, a semester course, and they have, okay, there are 85 competencies that are in here. That's kind of a lot, and I can see where that might be daunting for someone to look at and go, I don't know how I'm going to get through all these competencies in 18 weeks. So something I just kind of want to take a moment to point out is that these first 22 in particular are not intended to be standalone competencies that are taught independently of anything else. And an example of that, let's take number 3, for example, demonstrating initiative and self-direction. You're not necessarily going to have an entire lesson on that. It's probably part of a larger conversation about a project that the kids are doing, and how they're going to prepare for that, how they're going to problem solve it, and how they're going to figure out what needs to be done next and kind of plan things out. So don't necessarily feel like this is going to be something in addition to the content that you're teaching. It's actually incorporated and integrated into the content that you're teaching. And I do actually have a workplace readiness resource as a part of the resources that are available to you that you might find helpful. The other thing I would recommend is going and talking to some of your peers who are currently teaching this, and it doesn't even have to be the desktop publishing necessarily, but if you talk to any CTE teacher, they all have, whether they're in trade and industry, they're in tech ed, they're in FACS, they're all going to have those same 22. So this is a really great conversation piece as well. Ask them how they're integrating this into their classes and their lessons. And I think that's probably a really great place to start as you are trying to figure out how you want to put all of your content together. This is a really great common ground to begin with. Okay, the other thing I want to point out while we're over here is that you may notice there are these blue dotted lines around some of the competencies. What that means is that that competency isn't a requirement. That's a nice to have, not a need to have. So if you are coming through, let's say your multimedia component, which isn't that long, but you're just kind of running out of time, either because we had a snow day or maybe that snow day turned into a snow week, or you need to combine a few things because you ran long on something else. You know, stuff gets sometimes a little bit hairy there as you get toward the end of a semester. Just know that these are things that it's no skin off your back if you don't cover it. This is just a nice to have competency. I find a lot of times when I look at those things, I will set them all to the side, and then they make for great enrichment or expansion activities at the end of a semester. So it's the stuff that I might invite a guest speaker in, or we might do a virtual field trip for, or we might have some kind of fun project that we partner with the newspaper or the yearbook for, something like that. But I don't necessarily keep that as incorporated in the other competencies that I'm trying to cover. I'll usually set those to the side and then I add them back in if I have the time. The other thing that I want to just point out is if you're not entirely sure what they mean by the competency, the way the competency is stated, it will give you additional information. So, for example, let's look at competency 61 that says proofread and edit an advanced website. And maybe you're interpreting that one way and other folks are interpreting it a different way and you're just not really sure what they mean. The nice part is you can click on that competency and there will be a box that opens up that gives you a little more specific information about it. So when they talk about proofreading, reading, and editing, specifically they want you to proofread for accuracy, clarity, and correctness. And when they talk about editing an advanced website, they want you to validate code for compliance and functionality. So that might be a little bit easier for you to wrap your mind around, so that when you're planning a lesson or you're looking at a project that maybe you want your kids to do and you're trying to develop a rubric, this is a great place to kind of dig in and find some of that information and then kind of apply it. The other thing that is always helpful, I find, is some of the stuff that's in these boxes. Now, you will find there are some boxes that have a whole bunch of SOL stuff. You'll see things tied to history and English, and really that's just kind of spiraling, and it's not really something that you need to spend a whole lot of time paying attention to. The stuff that's going to be of greater interest to you would probably be the FBLA competitive events. And this is a way to tie in that that continued learning, that professional development, and that professional association. So remember, we were just talking about how the workplace readiness skills at the top, they don't stand alone. This is a really great way to do that because it's an ongoing conversation. So with CTE, our student organizations are not extracurricular, they are co-curricular. So that means they are incorporated into the competencies that are covered. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you are teaching the course using the competencies like you should, you're already going to cover FBLA items, and this is a way for that to be tied to each one. So for example, when your kids start covering competency 61, all about proofreading and editing an advanced website, these are some of the competitive events that they might consider competing in for FBLA. So digital video production or 3D animation or website design, these are all things that might be of interest to them, and they already have the skill set to do it. So, and to me, I always felt like this was helpful as an FBLA advisor, because I could look at the students who were in my class who did really well on a particular area and go, you know what you should really look at is this particular event. Take a look at that and see if that's something that's interesting to you, and we can work a little bit more on building up your skill. But you already excel in this, so I think this would be a really great thing for you to look at. So it builds up their confidence. It gives them, you know, an added experience. It helps them practice professionalism. There are just so many really great things that come from those kinds of conversations. So I would encourage you to just, you know, take a peek at that. Don't ignore those gray boxes down there. Just real briefly on the Imagine Academy resources, you want to watch some of these. For example, the Expression Web VDOE is great, but they're not always quick when it comes to making some of these updates. A lot of these things here are outdated. So either the links are dead, or things like Expressions Web 4 isn't even something that's being used anymore. So it's not something that you're going to want to go in here and use. So just be wary of that. Be aware and kind of use those judiciously based on what's really going to be beneficial for your class. We have provided a lot of great resources for you, so I don't think that's necessarily going to be an issue, but just a heads up. Okay, so I think we're probably going to step back over to our Schoology website, and we can continue on with our conversation. So those are the competency records. This is the workplace readiness resources, the workplace readiness resources I was talking about. These just give you some options for ways to plug this in, or conversations to have about it, or readings or blogs or things like that. So it's just a place for you to start. So I wanted to make sure that you had access to those in a really easy place. Here's your FBLA folder, and I broke this down into state and national. So this is our state website, which is what you would be using most of the time, and it's got stuff both for middle school and for high school. So regardless of where you're at, you can still have a club, you can still compete, it's still relevant to the courses that you're teaching. Same thing with nationals. It just, as you move forward, that might tell you a little bit more about what's going on outside of the Commonwealth. And then I wanted to make sure that I put the handbook in there just so that it was an easy place to access. This is actually on our Versa website, so the website we were just on. This is on there, but sometimes it can be a little bit tough to navigate and to find. So I wanted you to kind of have it on hand to refer back to if that's something that is helpful to you. And then finally are the competitive events. And those don't change very often, but again, this is why I used those links, so that the changes are kind of done in live time. So when changes are made on that website, they're made down here too, so that you always have the most recent, most accurate information. I felt like that was important and appropriate for you. You're not going to spend a lot of time in the sandbox. You're not going to spend a lot of time in virtual learning days. The only thing I will say about the virtual learning days is when you start getting information from your principal or your APs about when your virtual learning days are supposed to happen or how that's supposed to be used, and you have questions about, well, what am I going to do for this class? How is virtual learning day, how does that apply for my desktop publishing? That's when you go to this folder. Go in that folder, everything you need is in there, and you'll be good to go. The last step before we move on to your curriculum resources is your strategies folder. There is a ton of different stuff in here, and it's always I'm always trying to add to it or update it or change it with things that I think are going to be helpful for you. So everything from posters that might be helpful, graphic organizers, which I think are just the best, to stuff that's going to help in your classroom. So the teaching is not just about the content, and I think most teachers know that. And I wanted to make sure that you had some ways to incorporate other things that are going to help build up your students, that are going to help you achieve the kind of classroom environment that you're after. So I try to put some management strategies in there, stuff like helping your kids build agency for themselves, or what are some ideas around shifting up the way that I've got my seating arranged in my room. Some of those things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use all of them all at once. You can kind of pick and choose the stuff that you think is going to be helpful for you. You might even read an article or watch a video or check out a blog or go to a workshop or read a book. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different things in here. You could pick one thing out of one item and incorporate that. And if it helps make your life easier as an educator, if it helps build up and lift up the learning that's happening in your classroom, then that's a win, and that's something really great. And hey, you incorporated it into your teaching style and into your classroom, and now you can build on it with other things. So I don't think that this is something that is that kind of happens in a vacuum and you have to incorporate everything all at once or none of it's going to work. I think it's just taking those little things. And by and large, I would say that, teachers are aware of their own personal challenges and are looking for ways to plug in or looking for ways that might be helpful. And sometimes you just don't know where to look or where to start. And I'm not saying all the answers are in here, but I hopefully am providing you with a place to start. That's kind of what this is. So as you move down, And like I said, there are videos, there are articles, there's all kinds of stuff in here. There's also a blog. Cult of Pedagogy is one of the only ones that I ever recommend in here, and it's run by a former teacher. She's still an educator, but just fantastic. Really great stuff. She's got podcasts that are in there. She has downloadables, not worksheets, but some downloadables that will help you with activities, and it really kind of spans everything from teacher burnout right on down to writing rubrics. So there's a lot of different stuff in there. It is not specific to BIT, so it's really kind of open in education in a broad way. But that's one that I would encourage you to check out. I think that she's done some really phenomenal things. She's always coming out with good stuff, and I definitely would recommend taking a look over there, especially if you're struggling with something. I do have some suggested readings in here. Some of them are for kind of reference books. So I find for me that that's something that works really well. The other suggested readings that I'll often put in here are ones that if we decide we're going to do a book study, which we try to do at least one every year across TCE. So whether you're in business or you're in FACS or you're in tech ed, you can join. But these are really great book studies that we do, and a lot of times we'll choose books that are coming off of the ASCD list or have something that we think is going to be beneficial to you in the classroom. So that if there is a suggested reading that we put in there, I'll plug it in here as well. And again, not necessarily having to read the whole book, but maybe there's a chapter in there that would be really helpful. The other thing that I put in here, and this will vary from course to course, are any other suggested series, field trips, workshops, programs that I think might be helpful to this particular course. So this is why I say that these strategies are really for the course as well as the classroom. So this would be the course part. So the virtual field trips that are down here, like the Skype in the Classroom, or the video series on Road Trip Nation, is relevant specifically to the desktop applications course. So that's something that you may want to consider. You don't have to do it, just like the after-school program, Girls Who Code. That's an above and beyond, but it's something that might be helpful, especially in this particular case, because there is a unit on web design and websites, and that might spark something where you're having a conversation with your students, and that might be a direction that you could go in. So I wanted to make sure that that was available to you. So those are your strategies. The last place we're going to go is your resources folder. So inside your resources folder are all of the units, the projects or performance assessments, any resources. We try to put any resources that we talk about in the unit in there. We try to put rubrics in there for any of the activities that we have, and that's going to vary just a little bit from unit to unit, but this is kind of what you can expect. So as I mentioned before, desktop publishing has been broken down into 4 units, and while you might see Microsoft Word, what I really want you to think about it as is word processing. So because this is the first year that this course is straddling both middle and high school for high school credit, and we have a bit of a separation between who has labs and who doesn't, and how those labs are set up. So at the middle school level, you have docking stations, which are amazing, and you know, that may be a direction that carries over into the high school sites at some point. We're not sure. But because your access to some of those things is more limited, somewhat limited, I want you to think about things like the Microsoft Word as word processing. I want you to think about PowerPoint as multimedia, just so that you're kind of in a different frame of mind as you approach how and begin to make plans about how you're going to introduce this to the kids. And frankly, there's nothing wrong with them checking out other avenues. While Microsoft is definitely on the forefront of programs that are used, application programs that are used in offices and other places, they're not the only ones. So just know that I think that would probably be helpful for you to kind of keep an open mind and look for some ways to be flexible there. So for each of these, we've given you a general pacing guide about how long it should take for you to get through each of these. You'll notice most of them have been broken down into just over a month. And that's about how long you're gonna take. You're gonna explore that application and give the kids a chance to gain some skill in it, and then you're probably going to be working on a project. That's kind of how that works. We gave you some general competencies that you can expect to cover for each of these, and for each of them inside, you're going to see something that probably looks something like this. There will be a multimedia, or excuse me, a unit. There will be some kind of activity and a rubric that goes with that activity. And by the way, just one last note about these time frames that you're looking at. This is really just a ballpark. If Unit 3, for example, since I just clicked on that one, excuse me, if Unit 3 takes you 6 weeks instead of 5, or it takes you 4 weeks instead of 5, there is nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely okay. Things shift and change in the classroom. We know that sometimes kids are out, sometimes there are SOLs that are happening, sometimes we have those snow days that I talked about earlier, and sometimes it just takes your students in your class just a little bit longer to catch on to something. Sometimes they're really good at it and they just kind of fly through some of that stuff. What I really, to me, the purpose behind giving you that time frame for each of these is so that you have a ballpark of about how long it should take you to cover those competencies and to get through that topic. So I would say if this is supposed to take you 5 weeks and you spend 8 weeks in here, then that's probably when you want to regroup and really try to assess why it's taking you almost double the time to get through there. Sometimes that stuff is out of your control, but a lot of times what you may find is that maybe you've slipped into a little bit of hobby teaching, meaning you found something that you're really comfortable with, so you kind of want to stretch out the time that you're spending on that, or perhaps you're not comfortable with whatever's coming next, and so you're just kind of delaying the inevitable to get your kids in there, or it could be a time management issue. So maybe it's not that you're hobby teaching at all or that you're apprehensive at all. Perhaps it's just you've got to go back and take a look at how much time you're giving your kids to do certain things, and maybe they've got more time than they need. Or perhaps you need to condense a couple of those competencies so that you can get back on track. And certainly if you find that you need help with that, I'm always available. This is a great opportunity to plug into that discussion board we were talking about earlier. And you may find that maybe we need to go back and revisit how long it really does take us to get through Unit 3. Maybe we need to make that a 6-week and shift our time somewhere else, or maybe we do need to make it a 4-week and shift that extra time somewhere else. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. Just wanted to make sure I pointed out why those time frames are there and what you should be thinking about when you see them. Okay. So let's take a look at one of these. I actually downloaded one because sometimes it takes a minute for those to be downloaded, but for the most part, this is what your units should look like. So there is a general template that we use, and I know that when it comes to lesson plans and things that your site has specific, oftentimes templates they want you to use. And that's okay, because you will continue to write your own daily lesson plans, and that's as it should be. As a professional educator, you should have the flexibility, the freedom, and the agency to have some control over what's happening in your classroom and how you want that learning to unfold. So that shouldn't be happening at a central office level. That really should be something that you have more control over. So you are still welcome to put things in whatever template and however you like to put your lessons together and your projects together. Same thing with these units. This is just a suggestion. This is a place to start. If you feel like you have nowhere to begin, this is a really great place to begin. And you are always welcome to add to this. If you find that you have a different project that works even better for you, then I say absolutely run with that. The important part is that you are covering those competencies. So again, you can't just teach whatever you want to teach or have all 4 units be about PowerPoint in this case or multimedia. But if you find some stuff that maybe this is something that would enhance the project, or maybe you found something that just has worked really well with your kids, I say go ahead and share that. If it's something you're willing to share with the rest of us, I think that's a great way for us to learn from you, and it's an opportunity for us to try something different. And I think that's a great aspect of being in education. Okay, so in this case, we have the suggested pacing for 5 weeks. There are some essential questions in there. And I would say you want to make sure that your essential questions are not things that your students can Google, that they can have a yes or no answer to, or that there's a specific answer. The idea behind the essential question is really that it's provoking thought. So it should be much broader than whatever your enduring understanding or even your do is. These are your conversation starters. And really what should be happening is, as the kids are trying to answer that question, the conversation should be kind of like pulling on a thread in a sweater, where every time they think they have an answer, there are other questions that crop up or other problems that crop up. And so then they begin to dig a little bit deeper and dig a little bit deeper. So that's kind of the idea behind that. Okay, so each of these units is going to have the overarching enduring understanding and the essential questions and so on. And then it's going to give you some performance-based assessment. In this case, it's a favorite movie presentation. So in this second stage, there's going to be some teacher-to-teacher talk, and that's that description of what the assessment is and what the competencies are and what you're trying to achieve, and kind of what to expect in this case. They talk about teachers wanting to allow for about 5 classes for this project, and what the conversation should be around. All of that is really, that's for you to kind of get some background information on what to expect and how to put all of this together. The next section is a snapshot of what the student directions might look like. So you're not necessarily going to give your lesson plan or your unit plan over to your students, but this is a place for you to start. So a lot of times these are put in separate, just simple Word documents so that you can modify it or change it as you choose. But if you get into a file and for whatever reason those student directions are not put out separately, you can always copy and paste this stuff, or you could type it up separately, or you can put something completely new in there. But this is just a place for you to start with that. So, so those are the student directions, and then there is a rubric that's usually attached, and we've got that. These performance assessment, this self-assessment and reflection, these questions are actually the same regardless of the unit. And they don't change even from area to area. So whether it's marketing you're looking at, or it's business, or it's tech ed that you're looking at, these are the same. And, I think sometimes this gets skipped over and kind of lost in the process because we're all so busy and we just are ready to move on to the next thing. But I have to say, this is really important. It's important for us as educators and professionals just to take the time to self-assess and take the time to reflect. It's a big part of how we get better. We know that anytime we have an event or anytime we do a lesson, anything like that, the most important part is the debrief, right? So this is giving your students a chance to debrief, doing that self-assessment and that reflection, it builds their critical thinking skills, it builds their student agency, and it gives them a chance to take some ownership over what's happening. And it kind of is a great muscle for them to build up and to exercise. Because of that, it's going to make them better students, and it's going to increase their confidence in what their capabilities are. And I love to be able to do that for anybody, but to be able to see how that impacts your students in your classroom is a really great thing. So don't skip over this part. Even if you don't think you have the time to do it, find a way to incorporate that and to make time for it, because it is important. So down here are just other suggestions. These are not things that you have to use. You can build on it. If you find something that's the next iteration, for example, of Kahoot, which has been around forever, for a while, and it's really great, but there are probably some other things out there that would be just as good. So you don't necessarily have to use these, but we wanted to make sure we were providing a little something for you so that you had a place to begin. Now, I know that this said that the rubric was attached. So this is what this rubric looks like. I would say don't worry about these numbers up here. You incorporate what numbers work for you. I would rather say this is probably better to say that the 1 is approaching, the 3 is meeting, and the 5 is exemplary. In my opinion, that's probably a better way to set that up rather than give a score to it, because you as individual educators are going to have very different ways of setting up the grade for this. So I don't know that you necessarily need someone else making that decision for you prior to you pulling this down. So feel free to go ahead and take those out. And like I said, putting in something like approaching, meeting, exemplary is great, and then you score it however it needs to be scored. The thing that, and also feel free to modify this rubric, any rubric that you see as well. This is just one that was submitted that was helpful for this project, but you certainly can adjust it, add and delete things as you deem appropriate for your class and for the project that, or the way that you're going to use the project. The thing that I would say to you about rubrics is that they have to be specific and measurable. So you want to make sure that and they should, this is another important part, they should tie back to the things that you told the kids that they were going to be graded on or assessed for. So the things that are, the items that are sitting in your rubric should reflect the competencies that you said you wanted and the tasks that you said you wanted the kids to do. So if part of their assessment is supposed to be on graphics and creating a table and creating some different kinds of transitions between slides, then it's okay that that's on the rubric. But if there is nothing, if you've said nothing about transitions and yet you're grading them on that, that's going to create some confusion on what the goals actually were. And a lot of times I'll say when I see that, it's usually because we weren't clear as educators when we gave this project to our students. We weren't clear on what we really wanted them to do. So it's actually a really great backwards check for you as well as you're building this stuff up for your lessons. If you're finding that things are popping up in your rubric that you want them to know, but they weren't included as part of the project or as part of the competencies that you listed, you might just need to go and make a couple of adjustments, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I think we've covered just about everything that I want to cover for this. Like I said, it's a relatively distilled down version of what the training would have been had we been face-to-face, but I think it's a really great place to start. I think this is more than enough conversation, one-sided conversation from me on any topic. And certainly if you find that you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to me via email. And like I said, you're all on my mailing list, so be on the lookout for some of those invitations coming up in the fall for a roundtable or some other kind of training opportunity face-to-face that where we can have a deeper conversation about what's going on in our desktop publishing class. So thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon.